Hamas is claiming, and we have to take their figures at their word, and I'm not sure how credible they are, but they're claiming 7,000 Palestinians have died since October the 7th. But we don't know how many of those are terrorists and how many are completely innocent civilians, do we?
Every single one of them was a Hamas fighter, I'll have you know. All of those children that died, all those 2,000 kids that have died, they were all Hamas fighters as well.
Well, Israel and the IDF always target the Hamas terrorists.
Exactly, there were plenty of Hamas terrorists inside the Associated Press and Al Jazeera offices that they blew up this morning. Clearly, it was full of Hamas militants, right? Definitely not all of the Hamas militants being underground and them trying to eliminate people who are not giving them favourable press coverage. I couldn't possibly comment on such a thing.
Yes, sometimes the Hamas terrorists use civilians as human shields, but I wouldn't trust Hamas's statement. As we saw just a few days ago, it was Islamic Jihad who shot a rocket at a Gazan hospital. Hamas claimed it was Israel. The whole world echoed that for about 24 hours until it turned out that it's a total lie, and it indeed was.
I mean, no one's proved this. The NYT have already tried to disprove the IDF. You put out a fake conversation between two Arabic people that had been digitally manipulated and has been shown to be not credible evidence, right? I'm willing to say that I think this thing is still up in the air, but you doing the same kind of assumption that one side is correct here is exactly what you're accusing everybody else of doing within that first 24 hours as well. There is still no clear evidence. And all of the stuff the IDF has done is stuff that's been doctored, stuff that doesn't make sense, stuff that's untrue, mixed messages. But, you know, what do I know? I'm just a random YouTuber.
Was Islamic Jihad. So I wouldn't assign too much weight to their words, especially given that they're a group of rapists and murderers. So why would you trust them?
No, I completely concur that you don't have to take their figures just because they say these are the figures. But what is clear is a lot of civilians, innocent people, as well as, I presume, some terrorists, have been killed so far by the Israeli response with the airstrikes. It's clear also that a major ground invasion will massively increase the number of innocent people who die. And I've asked this question to a lot of guests in the last 3 weeks. I'll ask it to you. What is a proportionate response? Because people are already saying, look, 1,500 people in Israel were killed. It was barbaric. It was evil. It was an act of horrible terrorism. But if 7,000 people, or several thousand, and whatever the correct number is, have already been killed in Palestine, what is the number which becomes unpalatable even for people on the Israeli side?
The answer, of course, is it doesn't matter until every Hamas militant is being killed, which, of course, will never happen, because A, they'll never find all of the existing ones regardless anyway, and second of all, because they'll keep being able to recruit more the more that they radicalise people with continual exacerbation of the conflict and continual heightening of tensions and of hostilities. So they'll never do it. They'll never get all of them. And they know this, right? Yoav Galan has already said that they know this, but they don't care. Because as long as there are still Hamas fighters around, it gives them all the excuses they need to turn Gaza into rubble. Like we've seen whole neighborhoods get leveled. You trying to tell me that there were Hamas terrorists in every single building in that entire neighborhood? I'm sorry, it doesn't wash. It doesn't wash with me.
So it's not about proportionality to what happened. It's about preventing what will happen. What we've realized is that we have a ISIS state on our border. People who will rape, murder, dismember bodies, kill babies from point blank. So it's not about what happened, it's about the future.
True. Whereas killing babies from airstrikes or from shutting off the power to the hospitals, that's fine. That's a quote-unquote proportionate response, apparently, right? If one set of people killing babies is wrong, which it is, then surely the other side killing babies is also wrong. And maybe this is a bit too Occam's razor for you, Naftali, but...
How do we protect and defend Israel? There's only one way: total eradication of Hamas. So when you think about proportionality, it's not about the numbers, it's about how we get them out. But I will say, Piers, that IDF is very focused on preventing unnecessary deaths. That's why we went out of our way, according to international law, and
to bomb convoys leaving the exclusion zone that you created. And then also, once creating the exclusion zone, bombing targets in Khan Yunis and Rafah below the exclusion zone, preventing humanitarian aid from getting in, cutting off the water supplies and the food and the medicine, engaging in a siege in violation of international law, which will literally kill loads of babies that are in incubators right now. You're pretty economical with the truth in Naftali, I must say.
We allowed roughly 800,000 Gazans from northern Gaza to evacuate away from harm's way. So,
I mean, is it away from harm's way if you then proceed to engage in airstrikes on Rafah and Khan Yunis? Or indeed, on the convoy of people retreating?
in the theater of operations, as has been already made public, is going to be primarily northern Gaza, and we're allowing ample time, giving precaution, warning, bending over backwards to reduce the amount of civilian casualties.
And the thing is, of course, that's not true. That's not true because, as I mentioned before, they are still bombing sites south of the exclusion zone in settlements like Khan Yunis and Rafah. And even then, the only real reason why they're doing this whole exclusion zone thing, as far as I'm concerned, right? Whatever they might say about it, to me, given what's already been said by foreign ministers about making sure Gaza is smaller, about making sure that Arabs lose land, these are things that official members of the government have said. The only justification one can think for it, given the amount of which they've just flattened huge amounts of Gaza City, huge amounts of residential areas in Gaza City, just completely flattened, just all reduced to rubble. The only justification that I can possibly see for this is their desire to annex the northern half of Gaza, to displace these people, to engage in ethnic cleansing. There's no other justification that I can see here, given that every single reason that they've given for the exclusion zone has already been completely flouted. It's already been violated, their desire for an exclusion zone, given what they've done on South Gaza. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it does make sense if you see this through the lens of their desire for ethnic cleansing, which has been Netanyahu's plan this entire time.
What happens to those 800,000 Gazans if all their homes are completely destroyed? What do they come back to? Do they come back? If they can't come back, where do they go?
The Sinai, refugee camps in Egypt, anywhere but the territory that these people want to colonize.
They live.
Look, Israel's responsibility is not to provide housing and a high quality of life to an enemy state. I don't recall America or Britain asking those questions about Japan or Germany during World War II.
I mean, the fact that even Naftali Bennett can be so brutal, so completely disgusted by the sanctity of human life, by the sanctity of humanity in general, right? So bereft of humanitarian thought, such an absolute barbarian of a man, that he can even be lower in his own beliefs on what should entail an occupier and what they do to those citizens than the forces that invaded Iraq, right? At least the forces that engaged in Iraq at least pretended to nation build afterwards, to a very, very small amount. Likewise with Afghanistan. At least the US and UK and whatever forces thought, we've screwed up this country now, we've killed all these people, at least let's give something back and at least try and leave a functioning state afterward. It didn't work, it was a really piss-poor attempt, but at least they made it look like they cared. Unlike these people who are just like, yep, destroy all their homes, turf out all these people, not my fucking problem. When they were the ones doing the blockade, they were the ones doing the siege, they were the ones doing the occupation, they're the ones who've engaged in 75 years of human rights violations. And these people are barbarians. That's the only way of describing the far-right people in government, like Bennett, like Netanyahu, like Smotrich, like Ben-Gvir. The only description of these people is barbarians, because the sanctity of humanity is lost on these people.
Our goal is to minimize civilian casualties, but our main goal is to eradicate ISIS, Hamas. That's the main goal. Now, in the southern part, which is sort of the safe haven area, or we've created safe haven corridors.
Safe haven, in incredibly inverted commas. Again, please go tell that to all those people that you killed in Khan Yunis since creating the exclusion zone. Which is, of course, against international law, right? Forced transfer is against international law. That is indeed a war crime. creating the exclusion zone in the first place. But let's just brush past that. Let's just assume that's happening, because clearly that's not going to get changed now. There's no international pressure for that to change. This forced transfer of people, that's happened. That's a bridge that's already been crossed. That Rubicon has already been crossed now. So there's no going back. But now you've created that exclusion zone, you're then continuing to bomb targets south of the exclusion zone as well. Because they don't care. They just don't care.
We are allowing anyone to provide water, food, and medicine in safe haven corridors. So we're about protecting lives. The fact that thousands of Gazan and Hamas citizens and terrorists went in and raped and killed Israelis, yes, it has meaningful consequences that they brought about themselves. I also want to point out.
So that's him saying, yeah, so every single Palestinian should be punished for the crimes of the Al-Qassam brigades. Good. Now, this guy on screen, just admitting that he's happy to commit war crimes. Just war crimes A-OK in Bennett's book. And they do this all the time. Ottaveli was on Sky News back the last time that there was a conflict. I think it was in 2020, 2019, without protest. And she was just on Sky News. It was when they raided the refugee camp in Jenin. And they were just like, and she was just like, yeah, no, we do collective punishment. We commit war crimes, so what? Because they know they wouldn't get held to account. What's the over-under, chat? What's the over-under that Piers Morgan will respond here and say, so you're admitting to committing war crimes then? You're admitting to collective punishment, that you'll punish the whole population of Gaza for the crimes of the Al-Qassam brigades. And there won't be any pushback. They know they can just, with impunity, go on live TV in 4K or 1080p in this case and just say, yes, we do war crimes. We like doing war crimes. What of it? Who cares?
That contrary to what people think, there were also many Gazan civilians that entered Israel, and just horrible things. For example, we have evidence in videos of Gazan civilians coming out and saying, that girl, we don't want to murder, keep her for rape. I want to rape her, that one we murder, that one we take hostage. So,
first of all, source, citation. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I would just like to see some citations and some evidence of this. Because so far we have not been provided of this. As far as I'm aware, journalists have been provided about things that were engaged in by the Al-Qassam brigades in the kibbutzim that they engaged in their atrocities in. But this claim, this new claim that he's making, they were just citizens deciding which women that they were going to rape and take hostage or whatever, not seen any evidence of this so far. So I will treat this with a great degree of skepticism, considering the person who is saying this at the moment.
It's, the notion that Hamas is...
Again, they will make this shit up. They'll just create this nonsense. They have done before. I'm not saying that this definitely is or not. Again, I will need to see evidence, and until I have seen evidence, I will withhold judgment. But they're trying to run these narratives. They continue to try and make things as gruesome and grotesque and as dehumanizing as possible to justify their collective punishment. Well, we saw a civilian, some civilians, and maybe potentially, I don't even know, we've not seen any evidence. But even if they did produce an anecdote that said they found a couple of them doing it, that would still, none of this still would be justification for the collective punishment that he is admitting that he wants to do against the population of Gaza, right? None of this would be justification for this, but he's trying as much as he can to dehumanize the whole population, right? Ben Shapiro style. This is literally the same kind of rhetoric as Israelis like to build, Palestinians like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. Just this, well, you can't trust these people because these people are subhuman to me. That's the kind of dehumanizing language that he's engaging in. He's trying to conflate small sections of the population, the Al-Qassam brigades, these potential civilians, these, at this point, mythical civilians, that done what he said that they did. And they use them as a blueprint to smear the entire population, because then people are less likely to call him out for his war crimes.
Totally divorced from the massive public support of Gazans is untrue. Having said that, we still are going out of our way to allow the citizens away from harm's way.
Lie.
Queen Rania of Jordan was very vocal this week. Gave a very...
Oh, so I was right then. There is indeed zero pushback. Just, oh, okay, I'm just going to believe all that. I'm not going to challenge you on this at all. No challenge are you, Piers? No, not at all, right? Why would you be a journalist if you were going to actually push back on people rather than accept their narrative wholesale? That's real client journalism indeed, just allowing these people to just say whatever they want completely unchallenged. Yet when the Palestinian representatives are on, you're very forthright in challenging every single position that they take, very vociferous in doing so, interrupting them whilst they do so. It's really weird. It's really strange how there's this double standard every time.
Impassioned interview in which he accused Israel of being an apartheid regime, said that there's always a distinction in the West between Israel's right to self-defense against any right of Palestinians to self-defense, which is always categorized as terrorism. She said that whilst what happened October the 7th was savagely barbaric, why is that terminology never used about what Israel does to Palestinians? What was your reaction to Queen Rania and that interview?
So he wouldn't even create questions from himself. He just had to say, well, actually, I found somebody else who said these things. Do you agree? Rather than just, well, no, you've made these claims here, right? Here's my response to these claims that you're making. And then will we see if he'll challenge any response that Naftali gives to this question? I find it very difficult to believe that.
Well, she totally lied and said simply wrong and reprehensible things. Let's unpack this. She talks about apartheid. Let's talk about apartheid. There's about 1.5 million Israeli Arabs. They vote in the elections. They have...
Well, no, we're not discussing the Israeli Arabs. We're talking about the people in the Palestinian territories that you occupy. So those Arabs are completely irrelevant, right? Those Arabs are completely irrelevant because we already know, right, that you people don't want to acknowledge UN Resolution 194. You do not want to give Palestinians right of return. That has always been one of the biggest contention throughout every single peace process because you don't want to change the demographic makeup of your ethno-state. And you've been very clear that that's the reason why you don't want to acknowledge right of return. So no matter how many Arabs there currently are in Israel, there will never be a substantial bloc to upset that demographic makeup. And even then, they're completely irrelevant when the actual apartheid regime is what's going on in the West Bank, is what's going on in Gaza, the occupation, the blockade, the complete different way in which these people are treated when you already admit that you occupy the territories in the West Bank, right? You always find, when they always talk about apartheid, they always say, oh, well, we pulled out of Gaza. I mean, obviously you didn't pull out the airspace and the water space and the population registry, and didn't acknowledge their statehood either. Yet they always use that to deflect from the fact that they do indeed occupy the West Bank, and they admit that they occupy the West Bank. They settle in the West Bank. They break international law in the West Bank. They turn a blind eye to the outposts in the West Bank. People in the West Bank are treated completely differently, and it is an apartheid regime. These are basically Bantustans, as far as I'm concerned, and I think the global population would intend to agree with me.
One ballot like I do. There's over a dozen Arab members of Knesset. We have Arab Supreme Court judges. So we have Arabs even serving, some of them in the military. They enjoy...
None of this matters.
...full equal rights in Israel. So saying that Israel is an apartheid state simply has nothing to do with the facts. If she wants to...
I mean, literally completely ignoring the reality of the West Bank here.
...bring some facts to substantiate her lies, I challenge her. Bring me facts that show that Israel is apartheid. A. B. Regarding the barbarism and savagery of Hamas, Israel never, in our 75-year history, did anything near what they did. I want to explain. I today spoke to a family, the Zak family. The parents and the younger brother were murdered. They were waiting in the shelter, and the sister, Hadar, was not there. She told me that the dad was holding the shelter handle so the terrorists can't come in. What the terrorists did, they burnt the whole house and suffocated...
Okay, no one's trying to defend the actions of the Al-Qassam brigades here. No one's trying to defend that, Naftali. I know you're trying to deflect, right? I know that whenever anybody criticizes Israel, you go, but the nasty Palestinians, right? And, you know, fair enough. There are plenty of bad things that have been done by Palestinian militant groups over the past however many years. Nobody is disputing this, or very few people are disputing this. But that's not the question. The question was about the apartheid state. The question was about the occupation. The question was about 75 years of human rights violations. The question was about war crimes. And you first didn't even refute any of this. You just go, but the brown people, as if that is a good enough answer to what about all the bad things that you have done, your state has done, your government has done.
The mom, the dad, and young brother Sagi. His only comfort was they found Sagi and his mom hugged on the bed in the shelter as they were suffocating. This is something that no decent person would ever do. So shame on Queen Rania. Shame on her. And the fact that she can say these blatant lies is simply...
I'm sorry, Naftali, but facts do not care about your feelings. To quote the great Ben Shapiro himself again, because that's what he's doing. He ignores the facts, he ignores the statements, he makes something that is completely irrelevant as a statement to try and rebut the claim of apartheid, and then he goes, oh, but have you not heard about how bad things were during October the 7th? Yeah, we all know what was bad during October the 7th. We have been continually told how bad October the 7th was, but that's not the question. This is a complete deflection and a complete pivot.
Horrible.
Many people in Israel, 80% I think in the latest poll, believe that Benjamin Netanyahu should express some personal responsibility and apology for the catastrophic failure of security and defence on October the 7th. You have now said publicly that you feel responsible for what happened on your watch as Prime Minister, which may have contributed to the failings. Why has Benjamin Netanyahu not done the same, and should he?
You'd need to ask him. I don't want to stand here and criticize Israel's Prime Minister. I may have profound differences and thoughts, but...
I mean, you don't have that many profound differences. And even then, the rest of the population are criticising the Prime Minister. You're an opposition party. Surely it's your job to criticise the current Prime Minister.
I have a habit where I don't criticize Israeli leaders during war, and certainly not in international press.
But there's no doubt it was a catastrophic failure, and he is the guy at the top. If you had been Prime Minister, which you were several years ago, and this had happened on your watch, would you have resigned?
I don't want to go into that because, again, it's domestic Israeli politics. I have my set of ethics and standards that I adhere to for all my life. You have to send all these questions to Prime Minister Netanyahu. We've got a war to win.
Both President Biden and indeed Queen Rania and many others are saying that the only...
Piers Morgan is a pathetic little worm. He's a worm man. He does not hold anybody to account who shares his Western-centric narrative. I was giving him at least some plaudits for having some Palestinian voices on. But now that I've watched him completely fail to even bother trying to rebut the claims, trying to hold them to account, when they're on the other side of this discussion, just shows how partisan he is. And his commitment to some kind of balance in terms of the distribution of guests that he has is completely transparent, given the difference in interview style between these two types of guests. It is night and day, the level of interviewing that we're having here compared to what we saw with Hassan and Cenk, etc.
The way this gets resolved is politically, with people getting around a table. I think it's pretty clear that cannot be done as long as Hamas are in charge of Gaza, and certainly depends if there's any Hamas left at the end of this ground invasion anyway. You said in June 2013 the following. You said, I have a friend who's got shrapnel in his rear end.
And I love how Piers was just like, oh, well, we might have but we clearly want a political solution, but that can't be done with Hamas there. I'm like, that's there can be a political solution with Hamas. They've already come out, as we saw yesterday, in favour of doing a hostage exchange for a cease of the bombardment. That's a political solution, right? Do I think that you can trust Hamas at their word? I don't think so. I don't think that Khaled Mashal is definitely the most trustworthy of individuals. But it's clear, given the nature of the conflict, there's going to have to be some kind of political solution. And if you don't try, if you don't at least attempt a political solution, then all you're going to do is lead to thousands more deaths in this conflict and then also in the future conflicts that will spawn out of the rubble of what's been going on this conflict.
And he's been told it can be removed surgically, but it would leave him disabled. So he decided to live with it. There are situations where insisting on perfection can lead to more trouble than it's worth. And your quote, which became known as shrapnel in the butt, quickly became widely known as your view of the Palestinian problem. And you've always been resolutely opposed to a two-state solution.
Yes, yeah, the Palestinian problem. Does that sound like anything similar to any other kind of problems that previous believers in ethno-states have espoused in terms of their ideology? I will leave that to fester.
Do you think that kind of rhetoric helps? And do you not think now that the only way out of this, actually, is to have a two-state solution?
I totally disagree. I think what people don't realize, and I think that you gave me a good opportunity now, Piers, to emphasize, we provided the Palestinians with a full-blown Palestinian state in Gaza. In 2000.
No, you didn't. You didn't even recognize the state. No airspace, no military, not even with their own population registry, not control of their own territorial waters, no real actual effective governance, very, very little infrastructure, so much that they continue to rely on Israeli infrastructure to be able to get by, right? Entirely threadbare. That's just a total lie, a complete fabrication.
2005, since I think most of your viewers do not know this, Israel pulled out of Gaza, pulled out all its soldiers, pulled out all the Israelis living there, 8,000 Israelis, handed the keys to the Palestinian Authority. There was no siege, no blockade.
Well, it technically wasn't the Palestinian Authority, it was just the current people there in terms of Hamas leadership, right? There was an election and they won it in 2006 and they took control and haven't had an election since. And even then, again, in terms of infrastructure, really and truly, there was very little. That's not true at all, that there's a fully fledged state there. It's still technically occupied under international law. The United Nations recognises this. So don't lie to us, Naftali. Don't make shit up. Although, and again, I know that it's very difficult for members of the Israeli government and representatives of the IDF to be truthful, otherwise people would realise how full of shit they are.
Nothing. And they had the opportunity to turn their state into Singapore. And from the very first moment, Piers, they began shooting rockets, firing rockets at our towns. Since then, we've had tens of thousands of rockets from the very Gaza that we evacuated. So they had the full opportunity and they blew it. We did the same thing in Judea and Samaria.
True, it was really easy for them to create a fully functioning state in Gaza when it was blockaded on all sides, where Israel had control of the Ereth and Kerem Shalom crossing, where the Kerem Shalom crossing is the only place in which goods were going in and out, right? Where Egypt had control of the Rafah crossing and very rarely let things in and through. So much so that they dug tunnels underneath to smuggle things in across the border. When you erected a literal smart barrier, an actual wall to cage these people in the largest open-air prison in the world. Like, the absolute brass neck, the cheek of this guy, to try and say that we just left them to their own devices, gave them a proper state. We'll never recognise the state. They still had control over some of it, and also blockaded it whilst internationally still being recognised as occupiers. Nonsense. It's lies. It's total lies.
AKA the West Bank. During Oslo Accords, we pulled out of all the major cities, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron, Jenin.
And yet you still violated international law by continuing expanding settlements in Zone C and also sometimes in Zone B, as well as turning a complete blind eye to the outposts that are even more technically illegal than the settlements are, because they're not even technically legal under Israeli law, whereas the settlements are. Yet they don't care about the outposts either, where they fill watering reservoirs with cement, where they pull up people's food, where people can only go on certain roads if they have Israeli passports in these areas, penning people in Bantustans, controlling their movements, people being violently assaulted and being aggressive from IDF occupying forces, violating Shireen Abu Akleh's funeral after assassinating her as well. How dare you? How dare you try and tell us that there is some kind of level of autonomy in the West Bank just because you gave them the Palestinian Authority? How dare you? How absolutely dare you? The absolute temerity of this absolute maniac.
Gave the keys to the PA, and what we got from year 2000 and on was a barrage of suicide attacks in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and Jerusalem. So what I've learned, I'm a very simple guy. I look at the facts. And by the way, all Israelis, the overwhelming majority of Israelis agree. Every time we hand land over to them, give them the responsibility and the keys, they turn it into a terror base against us.
Again, giving them the keys is such an interesting narrative that he pulls here, because in no way does it actually explain the reality of what happens within the Palestinian territories, the reality of the Palestinian occupied territories, because they are still occupied under international law. Just say, oh, we gave them the key is an interesting way of being able to completely undermine the actual reality there and make it sound like they did more than they actually did. Because there's no chance, zero chance that Piers is going to interrogate what this meaningless phrase of give them the keys means. But I'm sure it was absolutely fine that the apartheid government in South Africa gave the keys to black people in the Bantustans, right? They were allowed to do whatever they want in their little fucking penned-in prison areas. If they feel like they don't like apartheid, that's their own problem.
So how stupid can we be to try this failed approach for the fourth and fifth time? We need a different approach. And I don't want to govern the Palestinians. I have no desire. Most Israelis do not desire to govern them. So make no mistake. But certainly...
So blame Ariel Sharon. He was the one who walked away from the Taba talks. The Taba summit was the closest they've ever got to a peace agreement, because Ehud Barak pulled back on his incredibly hawkish demands to take control of places like Sheikh Jarrah and all of the settlements around Jerusalem, and also 90% of Jerusalem was in the initial Camp David summit agreement that Ehud Barak wanted and Yasser Arafat turned down, as well as there being no actual contiguous West Bank state either, which was potentially on the line in the Taba summit, which was then turned down by Ariel Sharon when he was elected at the end of the talks and refused to reopen the summit because he thought Barak was being too generous in the territories that he'd given over at the Taba summit. So why don't we talk about that, shall we? Or do you just want to conveniently forget when the people on your side of the political aisle, the right-wing end of the political aisle, in the Israeli government, are the ones who've capsized the talks more often than not? More often than not, they've capsized the talks from the Israeli side. Netanyahu did the same thing to Abbas in 2008.
We cannot allow them to have any arms, any army, any terror organization. And the first and foremost thing that prevents peace is having Hamas. So there's no way to even imagine peace as long as Hamas exists on this territory.
Naftali Bennett, thank you very much indeed for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly. No response, no challenging, no riposte to any of his statements. Just, here you go. Here's your platform to propagandize at my audience with zero pushback, with zero rebuttal to any of the things that he said. Wow, Piers Morgan, you are pathetic. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.